the UK then?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Exactly.
Ah, okay. This was my first question, basically, because Angeli is then an English name, and Möller is typically, I would say, German name.
Actually, so Anjali is an Indian first name.
Oh,
And I think in Gujarat in India you would pronounce it more Anjali.
mhm.
And then yes, Möller is clearly a German name, so low German name.
And this is what brought you then to Berlin, I guess,
So
wedding, marriage.
I had the opportunity during my studies, so when I was studying molecular biology, to spend a year in industry. And last week I actually gave a careers talk at my former research institute. And I strongly recommend getting some industry experience, even if you're on an academic track. And I had the opportunity to work in the UK, but then there was this one placement in Berlin. And of course, if you're 21 years old and you have the opportunity to go live in Berlin for a year, then you're going to jump at it. And now I've been living in Berlin for 20 plus years,
Wow.
coming up to 21 years, and just absolutely love it here.
May I ask the question? I mean, England is great, Scotland is great, India is great too. What attracted you to Berlin? Why Berlin?
So it's also what attracted me in the first place, and then what really keeps me in Berlin. And I think what attracted me in the first place is just that there's so much happening. If you're interested in something, the Philharmonic, the opera, um, tech startups, of course, any sort of research, there's just so much happening in Berlin. And from a career perspective, I felt as if there were just more research laboratories in Berlin than there were in the whole of Scotland. So I never checked that statistic, but I just felt there was so much happening. And that's what brought me to Berlin. I think what kept me here is simply the cultural freedom that Berlin allows you. So you are really free here to express yourself, to experiment with whatever sort of art or culture or theater you might be interested in. And that also leads to a very innovative environment for technology. Now, I do think that we need to really grow the industry in Berlin and grow the technology so that you get from startup to mid-sized company to successful large company. And I think that's somewhere where Berlin is not doing so well. And yet for a place to live, I am just really happy that I chose this city and that I get to remain here.
I totally agree to the last parts that you said that we have to grow the economies not only in Berlin, but I think across Europe. When I look at capital markets and Series B, Series C, there is only one way for European startups, and this is the United States currently. So we have a lot of work to do. But I found the first part very interesting, where you said that Berlin has a unique cultural environment where people are free to experiment with arts, with technology, with different ways of life. And it reminded me a little bit of what I read about Silicon Valley, that also the attitude that seemed to have started appearing there in the 40s and 50s of the last century with the Beat generation had a similar dynamic. Can you expand a little bit on the dynamic on the cultural side in Berlin? What makes Berlin so unique?
So most of what we'll talk about today is my scientific and technical background, but I also very much enjoy going to music, going to listen to music. I enjoy going painting myself and also going to see exhibitions. And when I first came to Berlin, I felt that nobody had one job. But when I was out and I was meeting people, everybody had three jobs, four jobs. Everybody, of course, was the DJ. That's a given in Berlin. But then, as well as something creative, they were then working in a larger company, also maybe had a startup or a venture, had a series of investments, it felt, and still today feels like a place where there's just not so much restriction. And when you meet people, they have very full, very diverse and interesting lives. And that's just a very stimulating environment to be in.
Yeah, it's a difference to the structured German approach. I got to know in the 80s and 90s with the factories, and now it seems to be more evolving to a more dynamic environment, especially in Berlin. We are talking about approximately 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, this time. And when I think back to 2008, 2009, 2010, you also have a biomedical background, I saw on your profile. So when I think back at my experience with venture capitalists and with the pharma industry in that area, whenever I tried to convince them to look towards digital solutions, they pushed back. And it was not something very logical to do. So there is pharma, there is the digital world, and it seemed to be more like silos. And you were attracted to artificial intelligence in healthcare. What motivated you to go into this direction, although back in these days it was not a common thing to do?
And I think, Christian, that a lot of my experiences resonate with yours. So even I remember speaking to someone in 2016 who just said they didn't believe in artificial intelligence. That was their entire statement and sentence. And this is quite an influential person in the industry, and said, I do not believe in artificial intelligence. Punct. End of discussion. I would say that it's still very important to look at what is the reality of how the money is made in this industry, and how a patient really is supported and benefits in this industry. So ultimately, the question isn't, is it using machine learning? The question is, does the medicine work? And that should be the question. That's the right question to ask. Does the medicine work? Does the diagnostic tool work? Those are the questions that you need to ask. Does it use machine learning? Yes or no? Okay, that's interesting, but does it work? And that's true in many, many industries, not just in healthcare. Does the product work? Does it meet an unmet customer need? I do think, though, that the big hype cycle, and of course Gartner just popped out their latest report on the AI the AI hype cycle, did lead to a lot of fraud. So a lot of false claims, people continuing to claim that artificial intelligence could do things that it simply couldn't. And that level of fraud led to a lot of disillusionment. It also led to certain investors losing money because there were big claims made and then those claims didn't pan out. So I'm very sympathetic to people who went through that situation. But on the other side, there was a trend in which some companies really rebuilt their entire pipeline of how they develop new drugs, how they develop new products, using all the technologies available to them, one of which was artificial intelligence. They said, I'm going to use whatever's available to me to make the best product. And they've been tremendously successful. And often machine learning was a big part of their success. And then you see others who just continued not to use all of the tools available for them to make the best product, and then suffered accordingly. That's a shame to see. And I think that's where, at the core of everything I do, is saying you have to marry the technical expertise with the business acumen, because there are people who will claim something can do everything when it simply can't, and you need to be able to see through that and find your way through that.
I totally agree to that. There is a lot of storytelling on the market, and this sometimes differs from reality. What I find interesting in your career is you have started with a scientific career, basically an academic career, and then transitioned to the pharma industry and took over leadership roles. How was that for you? What motivated you to go in the leadership direction?
So I would say, as a leader, it's a journey. But I'll go back then to the first point where I took on leadership roles. And it was really because I couldn't stand it when somebody else decided which project was getting financed. Just absolutely couldn't stand it. Even as an academic, I couldn't
I
stand
can relate to that.
And so I was then very vocal all the time about what I thought should be getting the funding, why I thought it should be getting the funding. And then that naturally led to me being put into leadership positions. So gradually over time, it became a lot more about looking after people, maintaining people's welfare, allowing the team to shine. That became a bigger and bigger part of the leadership roles that I had. But that initial trigger was very much, I want to decide which of these initiatives, which of these channels is going to get the funding. And I have strong opinions and a voice about what I think should be getting the funding. And that voice was heard, leading to those leadership roles.
Yeah, and they usually put you then in charge when you open your mouth much
Yeah,
too often. So they then decide and do it, and then you're responsible.
exactly.
Uh, how do you see leadership these days? I mean, on one hand, you need profound, especially in pharma. On one hand, you need profound expertise in the traditional pharma areas, which mostly is drug development when we talk about pharma. Then you also need scientific expertise in the digital world, and then you need leadership expertise. Is it really necessary to be successful in pharma, in the digital world, to have all three areas covered, or can someone just say, okay, I focus on leadership and I have my experts that I can go to? How do you see the mix of these three, we'll say, three fundamental pillars of leadership?
I think leadership covers a big swathe of terms. So if we look at a large pharmaceutical company, they have several global executives who have slightly different roles to play in that company and therefore will lean on certain strengths more than others. I would say that when you're in a large corporation, any type of corporation, a pharma corporation, automotive company, and you're responsible for many people in many different countries, you have to be somebody who takes that people leadership seriously. And you have to take it seriously for two reasons. One, which is a little bit cold. You can really damage your company if you don't take that responsibility seriously. There are legal employment laws that you have to be aware of in each of the countries you're operating in. There are um, working to get the very best out of those people, because a company in the end is all of the people that it's composed of. It's a community that has to work together effectively, and you have to care about that just for the basic success of your company, of the enterprise. Then the other part of that is looking at it also from a more human perspective is, are you passionate about helping people further their careers? And I think that's where you get really great leaders in companies and people who others really want to work for. You go and work for someone and you know that your career is going to benefit because this person is going to look out for you. This person is not just going to look out for themselves, but they're going to make sure that you're progressing, that you're doing well. I've been lucky enough to have leaders like that. I try to be that kind of leader. And I think the success story, again, for companies is that the best talent then want to work for this person. And they stay and they're retained working for this person.
Yeah,
Yeah, Christine.
go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, the scientific and technical acumen, I was actually speaking to a client yesterday about this. So they were asking me about how necessary this is in a role which is customer facing. So for a customer facing role, how critical is it to have this acumen? I would say that first of all is you can learn it. So if you didn't come up as I did through academia, don't imagine that you can't choose to learn a new skill set. I think we nowadays live quite a long time. And since we live quite a long time, it's important not to be afraid of jumping in and learning a new skill sets. I do think that in the scientific and technical industries, it does make a difference to be able to bring that background. But you have to remember, nobody is an expert in every single part of the biotech or pharmaceutical business. That's why you have a cluster of experts usually. I'll give you an example. So I've specialized in molecular biology, machine learning, and right now I'm doing work on quantum computing with the Science and Technology Facilities Council, which is based in the UK. So those are areas in which I would go and feel very comfortable in. But if you look at a completely different area, like the go-to-market strategy, there are other people who are better qualified in a go-to-market strategy. And I think a key strength as a leader is to be able to say, and now I will bring in somebody else who has that strength, and make sure that the client, the customer, or the company is getting really what they need in terms of the right expertise. I think then, the third part of leadership is really strategy and vision, knowing where you want the organization to go, being able to have that resilience as you face setbacks, as you continue to drive the organization into the right direction. And that is, I think you just have to just have a lot of adrenaline, just be the sort of person who has a very clear idea of what the direction is. And I think then where I really see leaders that I admire are those who are able to have that urgency, that sense of direction to overcome obstacles, and yet to still at the same time listen to their teams so that they don't switch off and become blinkered while they move towards their goal. And then that's really, for me, the true strength of a great leader.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. You mentioned that leadership is about leading people. And I agree also to what you say that the leader must not be the best expert. He should have an interest in the area his company is operating in. But actually, it's leading. I think it is back 15 years ago when I experienced sometimes in small to medium-sized companies that they would like to evolve a person to 10% leadership role, so 20% leadership role. In my opinion, it's not doable. In my opinion, leadership, managing people, selecting the right people, motivating people, getting them on board, also cutting people from the payroll when they don't perform is a full-time focus and cannot be added 10% or 5%. How do you see that?
I would say it really, for me, Christian, depends on the size of the team. So if I look at early leadership roles I had when I was at the Max Delbruck Center here in Berlin, and I was researching neuroproteomics. I supervised a team of a couple of PhD students and a few technicians, and some master students were always there. And I worked as a researcher at the same time. So I was still in the lab. I was still actually, that's when I was doing quite a lot of machine learning work myself in my own research, and it was perfectly comfortable. It also added to the respect I had that I would be in the lab, that I would be producing research, that I wouldn't just be sort of orchestrating other people's research. Then if I look at my most recent role at Roche, you had I think my first role at Roche, I had something like 650 FTE, so 650 people. And then in the second role, we brought that down to 450 because it was having a different goal, that organization. It was a global hub, and that seemed like the right size for it. When you have an organization that size, and I mentioned it before, employment law, when you also have to be aware of employment law in multiple different jurisdictions and countries, and you want to make sure that everybody is working towards shared outcomes, shared goals, that they're able to bring their creativity, it's absolutely 100% role. You have to really care and be passionate about that. You have to be passionate about the outcomes of the organization and the company, but also very passionate about the people leadership in order for that to be successful. You spend, and you may have had this experience, you spend quite a lot of your time in those sorts of roles, just listening, just being there, walking around, being available to your team. In my case, it was flying around, just being available for the team.
I had a similar experience back in Agrana when I was working in merger and acquisition. And first it was building a new division supporting that. And the second one was then more in the traditional sugar business. And initially, I mean, it was 2002, 3, 4, 5 this time. And initially I thought, why not manage it from Vienna? And we have now email, we have telephone, and my boss, she was also one of the big leadership women here in Austria back in these days. And she said, if you think you can do it, you can try it. But I say, drive, go talk to people. And it took me a month to really come to the same conclusion as you did. This was mostly traveling, talking with people, finding out what problems they have, how the headquarter can support them solving that problem, legal issues and all this stuff. So it's really talking to people, traveling and being with them, and not just being someone sitting around.
I find it's, for me, that's been a big topic that I spent a lot of thought on in the last 12 months, because it's also the CO2 emissions. So the CO2 emissions are shocking in business travel. And if you're environmentally conscious, as I am, it can be tough to reconcile this lifestyle together with flying around. So I'm a big train taker. If it's in Europe, I was just in Paris 2 weeks ago. I took the train from Berlin to Paris. That was lovely. If I go to Geneva, that's a longer trip. Again, I'm just taking the train. Even I've been looking at trips to Madrid on the train, and you have to change rail networks to do that. But again, if I can take the train, I will take the train. But we know, I had a role where my team was spread over 120 countries. You're not going to take the train. You really are going to end up on an aeroplane. And I think I do push the limit of what I can do remotely, largely because of the CO2 consumption, because I really am conscious that I'm not being, someone called it once, a corporate tourist. And I thought that was very funny. So the sort of person who travels on the company's dollar just because they like to travel and not because it's actually really important for the company. So if I go out and I travel, I want to be really sure that it's impactful for the people I'm going out to see, that it's impactful for the organization I'm representing. And so one of the things coming out of the pandemic I have been very thoughtful about is, what are those occasions where it's really going to be impactful for the organization, for the people who I'm going to meet, and what are the times where just actually could be a longer virtual coffee with somebody one-on-one, giving them the chance to open up, perhaps making a call from their home office in a wholly confidential environment where they feel relaxed, and they might then just find that a comfortable space to talk to me about what's going on.
Yeah, digital solutions have gone a long way in the last 4 years, so it's really improved. It was different before 2020. Environment is, of course, a problem, but I think the leaders are aware of that, and usually, I agree to what you say, usually make the decision very environmentally conscious if it's necessary to travel or if it's not necessary to travel. And sometimes it's just a question, I mean, like COVID, you brought the example, do you want to have a new vaccine on the market within 1 year? Then you need to do what's necessary. If you can live with 5 years, then you can do more from home. But I learned it really speeds up things sometimes when people feel seen and heard and get positive feedback from leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it's making sure you don't underestimate the differences between different sites and different countries. And now that I focus more on clients and the different clients I support with my company, then you want to be face-to-face with your clients. And I do as much as possible face-to-face with the clients, just to make sure that I have that deeper understanding of what their needs are, what's the environment they're in every day. I want to be able to really easily visualize the environment that they're experiencing every day because I've been there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes you need to see how they live, especially in the psychological side. What is the reality in the company? I mean, podcast we can do easily via Zoom call. It's not necessary to fly you into Vienna or me going to Berlin, but client work, especially when you have to deal with reorganizations, it's really helpful to see that. But when we go back to your career and make the sidestep to leadership later on, you started in cancer research. What motivated you to start early on, including artificial intelligence, machine learning, digital tools into cancer research?
So I would say, I mean, it would be lovely to claim that I was just some sort of genius, but I would actually say it was a lot of the influence of the European Institute for Bioinformatics. And I'm a huge fan of the European Institute for Bioinformatics. So it's funded by 17 different countries who have a multilateral agreement to fund this organization. It has 2 headquarters, one in Cambridge and one in Heidelberg. and it was hugely influential throughout my research career. It provides resources that reduce the cost and the burden of research in terms of wholly integrated data sets. So data sets and also bioinformatics tools that you can just easily access as an academic researcher. So I began my journey simply accessing their resources, what is available to use, and everyone around me in the lab I was working in at Cancer Research UK was making liberal use of all of the tools available to them. It was then during my later research, so I moved out of cancer research into working on neurodegenerative diseases, and that was here in Berlin at the Max Delbruck Center. And there I had the opportunity to collaborate with some strong informatics groups that were at the same research institute. And that was the time where we really got into machine learning. And we had problems where we really needed to use machine learning. So we were taking a human chemical synapse and we were creating in silico models of that synapse. And one of the interesting transitions was in cancer, there are a lot of very well-defined pathways. I think you could almost call it a mature research area, oncology. And when I went into neurodegeneration and how does a healthy brain work, so we were first of all just modeling how does a completely healthy brain work. I felt like we knew nothing. It was so surprising to me going into neurological research, how little was known. How do you form a memory? How do you lose a memory? All of these very basic questions about brain function were just not really well understood. And so the amount of data that was available was fortunately very rich, and I was part of an EU Framework 7 funded grant. I was part of 2 grants. So we had a lot of money, or sufficient money, to create data, to integrate data. And when you have that level of data and such a challenging problem, machine learning is your friend. That is the way that you're going to be able to really make significant breakthroughs. And so for me, I would say one of the points is there is a lot of specialization in the last few years in artificial intelligence and in machine learning. But for me, it is a tool. And the question is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And then don't blinker yourself to any of the tools you could use. There's so many different tools. I mentioned now we're doing more work in quantum computing. There's so many different resources. Some of them are simple. Some of them are complicated. You don't have to choose always the most complicated solution, but just keep your mind and your resources open to what's actually going to help you bring something relevant to your company, bring something relevant to your patients, bring something relevant to you, to the market.
Yeah, the European framework programs. I think this was before Horizon. Are they still called framework programs?
That's right, framework.
Yeah. And I worked at one in at the end of the 90s. We were analyzing how the novel internet technology changes the economies. And it was in logistics, basically. So we had a look at logistics. It was really fun. So we had to define the programs and the projects that were funded by the European Union and suggested to the community by Austrian ministries and German ministries. It was a really interesting approach. Was it still the same when you did your framework program?
So we had, I was really lucky in that we had very high caliber scientists involved in the grant. So including the Nobel Prize winner, Nea. So that was a huge privilege to be able to work with a Nobel Prize winner, of course. The thing that I enjoyed the most was that we were 15 different laboratories across Europe and Israel. And so this collaborative research environment, I think is this sweet spot. Groups that perhaps wouldn't naturally come together and share information are now funded in a way that incentivizes them to come together to share information openly with each other. So I think that's a tremendous thing about these grants. And then the other part was that's my first taste of really traveling and working internationally. So I went out to the labs in Israel for a while. I went out and traveled to the Czech Republic and was working for a time with a group there. And and understanding what became a big part of my career later is these different international work environments and how to bring them together to produce an outcome jointly.
Yeah, for me, it was similarly exciting. I was a student and working together with people from Harvard, University of St. Gallen, Elga Fleisch, who wrote a book about networked economy, University of Graz, and then also industrial partners that were big in these days and some got acquired later on. It was so amazing to get all these different inputs in practically no time.
And I was just at the Research Institute on their PhD student retreat last week. So I went there to go and talk to the PhD students in it's computational oncology research. So they call it CompCan. And I just blown away by the caliber of the PhD students as well. So truly brilliant young people with so many options in front of them. And I think that's the other part of having enjoyed this academic career, but then always keeping one foot connected to the academic world, is you just have really next level individuals when it comes to intellect, when it comes to scientific insight, when it comes to new technical development. Now, I think you and I would both say, and even people in industry and in academia would say, you can be very brilliant and never come up with anything that reaches humanity because you keep it locked away in your lab and trying to get them connected to industry, trying to get those innovations out of the lab into the real world, commercialized, helping to grow the country's economy, helping to create new jobs, helping to actually have a beneficial impact on society. I think we all know that's where we constantly need to work and do more work.
And this is where leadership plays a huge role. So it's one person can't do anything all by themselves. It needs leaders who step out and say, okay, I'm fine with not being the best in everything. I'm fine with finding the best people. And I think this is one of the most important character traits, to really look for the best in people and then bring them together and work alongside them, knowing that the leader is not probably the best person. It's not an ego game, which leads me to the next question, women in tech. So you have a long career from academia up to big leadership roles in big pharma. What was your experience as a woman in tech, in leadership? How was your journey through that? What were the hardships and what were the good story, the good times?
I would say that I often don't think about it. I get the question all the time. How is it to be a person of color in tech? How is it to be a woman in tech? I would say that I think about it mostly when I'm in this type of discussion or on a panel at a conference, then it often comes up. And I was reflecting on it with some PhD students that I was mentoring at one time, and they were women. And I said, oh, I'm not too sure how I feel when I get asked this question. They said, it's really helpful that you get asked it. It's really helpful that we hear you on stage answering this question, that we hear you in podcast answering this question, because we're looking to see what that route should look like for us. And so, first of all, thank you for asking the question. I would say that for me personally, I have often worked in environments where there were very few women, or even at one point where I was the only woman. I was at one point where I had a role where I was the only woman at my level, and there were no women at the level of leadership above me, and no women at in the teams below me, although that was something we changed over time. I think, first of all, it has been interesting to reflect with my peers on why no other women were hired, or perhaps why so very few women were hired, and to have that opportunity to reflect on how women are viewed in the workplace. So do we see them having roles where they have budget accountability? Do you see them having roles where they're making significantly impactful decisions? And for me, one of the things I realized particularly as I became a leader, was that part of making it easier for a diverse group of colleagues to come into leadership roles was to also respect that many people have caregiving roles beside their career. So they're either looking after older parents, or they're looking after children, or they're having some other sort of caregiving role. And now this obviously isn't exclusive to women, but it is something where a lot of women I meet make decisions in their careers based on the fact that they also have a caregiving role. And one of the things I find very interesting is when you have an organization that is ready to allow somebody to be a caregiver and to be a serious global executive. So to show that they can do both things at once. It might not look the way a global executive in the 1950s worked, but that they're perfectly capable of making sure the company reaches all of its KPIs, making sure all of the deliverables and outcomes are reached for the organization, on bringing that creativity, and yet still giving them the flexibility to manage caregiver roles at the same time.
How do you balance your private life with your business life?
Yeah, I would say it's something I've got better with at time. You know, if people who know me will be listening to this as well, I'm sure they will have laughed at that question because I have a reputation for working all the time. I would say when I was in academia, I would work all the time. I even slept in the laboratory coffee room sometimes when I wanted to run overnight experiments, and I just couldn't wait to see the results. I just wanted to try and troubleshoot something that wasn't going right, and I would just work all the time. I think one of the things that happens to almost everybody as you get older, leadership position or not, is that you see the benefit of being really present in a moment. So whether you're at home with your family, whether you're sitting one-to-one with an employee who really needs you, whether you're with an investor and you're having a really critical discussion, it's important to be wholly in that moment. And one of the things that have changed as I've grown older is that I focus less on the quantity of things I'm doing every day and more the quality of the things I do each day, to really be present in that moment, to make sure that whatever it is I'm doing, it has my full attention, and I'm not just trying to pack in another 20 things that day. I don't know if it's the same for you. I feel that's an experience many people have as they grow older.
Oh, I totally agree. I totally agree. I think the advantage of growing older is developing the ability to choose the right tasks over minor tasks and be fine with that. So I think this is really doubling down on when you have a conversation, you have a conversation. You don't write emails or answer a phone. When I think back 20 or 30 years ago, I think it was just we can do this, we can do that, we can do this. And nobody wanted to decide what's first and what's last. And I think this is an advantage of age, simply experience.
I would say I have seen leaders who are always on their phone, who are texting during meetings, who are here and there. And my thinking is always, if it works for you, if it works for you, that you would, I know some people have very strong feelings about this being very bad behavior. I don't do it because I feel I get more creativity from just being in the moment. I'm breaking the stereotype of women being multitaskers. I never claim to be a multitasker. I like to be in the moment and thinking about the person in front of me. But you will be at meetings and you will be working with people who are texting or, you know, answering Microsoft Teams or Google Chat the whole time. And I just always think if that is working for you, if that helps you to get all of the outcomes that you need to achieve, then that's great. For me, it's been such a luxury to allow myself to be in the moment. And as you asked about work-life balance, also to be in that moment in my private times, and quite into paddle boarding this summer. So doing a lot of paddle boarding this summer, and was out on the lake yesterday and will be out later today. And I think just giving myself that moment to be out on the lake, to be looking at nature, to just have those creativity unlocked is something I really treasure now.
Paddleboarding is great fun. Can agree to that. What you said earlier, I think, I mean, you're right. If it works for another person, I mean, they can do whatever they want to do. The question then is, do you allow that in your environment? I think it's a question about values. And when I look at what I feel comfortable with, I feel much more comfortable with people who can focus at the tasks that are now necessary to do, like having a podcast. I mean, it would be fun if I start writing emails while you were talking, or you pick up your phone when I ask questions. I think companies also could benefit a little bit more from mindfulness and focus, and not trying to multitask all the time. Personal opinion.
It's interesting. I really, you get a lot of leadership training in a corporation, right? So I've been in corporate environments for a long time, and they roll out a lot of leadership trainings. And a lot of people are skeptical about these. They say, oh, it's a lot of corporate blah, blah. But I found them actually often to be very rewarding. I don't do them constantly, but I do them occasionally, and I found them to be very high quality and rewarding. And one of the things that, of course, we get a lot of training on is managing diverse teams, how to allow the team to continue to be diverse. And so how does that manifest then? Some people don't like to have their camera on in a meeting. Some people are perfectly happy to have their camera on and have some specially set up background at their office that they like to use. Some people, as we say before, will be multitasking. So if I'm working sometimes with developers, their head is always half in their code. Maybe they really don't want to be bothered for a long period of time because they want to have that creative time with their code. Then there may be other people who want regular check-ins, who want to talk more often. And so one of the things that those trainings have helped me to be really mindful of is to focus on, are we meeting our outcomes? Are we meeting our KPIs? And to worry less about how the individuals are working. So long as they work in a way where they're respectful to each other and follow the basic principles of the company, then they should choose the path to their contribution that works best for them. And I think you said this yourself, if for them the best thing to do is to be chatting away on 100 apps at the same time, then that's great, and I'll just try to adjust to that environment for them.
As long as they produce an output, I mean, how they produce the output is their problem. I was more thinking about meetings and the meeting culture, and I think when I think back at the last 30 years, sometimes in companies it was that meetings were not really planned, that were very impulsive. So whenever someone felt it was time to meet, they called 10, 20 people, which was not really clear why 20 people are in the meeting, what the outcome of the meeting should be. And I think it was 10 years ago, I discovered Jeff Bezos' method, this 6-page method. I thought, for me, it absolutely makes sense, because when you force people to prepare for a meeting, to think things through, most of the time the impulse just goes away, because okay, it's not necessary to have a meeting. I have the answer, so I can continue working. And I think this reduces a lot of wasted time in companies and increases also the quality. So this method that Jeff Bezos developed force people to think things through, define a role, define the purpose of a meeting, define the outcome of a meeting, and then make sure that everybody in the meeting knows why they are there and why they are contributing, benefits companies. I think, in my opinion, it should be a little bit with boundaries, diversity in behavior in companies. How do you see it?
Well, you just listening to you talking about the approach at Amazon. So I mentioned briefly, but I sit on something called the Science and Technology Facilities Council, which is funds scientific research within the UK. And here we have two of our board members on the Innovation and Business Board who come from AWS, and they always follow this approach in the meetings. But we also have board members from NVIDIA, from venture capital funds, from many different groups. And so each one comes from a different company. Each one comes with a very different company culture, and then we find ways to work together. And I like the opportunity to appreciate the different ways of working. I think it is important to always be honest about your personal preferences. So I would say to anyone at any stage in their career, be honest about what works for you. One thing it sounded like, very Zen before, but there are some things I hate. The one thing I hate is being CC'd on an irrelevant email. Absolutely hate long email chains, completely irrelevant, and someone keeps me on CC. I mean, maybe it's a relevant conversation for them, but please don't keep me on CC. The worst is when they keep me on CC as sort of a warning, like, look, I put a senior executive on CC, so you better watch out. I'm like, you don't need to rely on the presence of somebody more senior in the organization. Either your argument is persuasive enough or it isn't. And the hierarchy in the organization shouldn't come into that discussion. So that's definitely a pet peeve. And I have had occasions where somebody has really insisted that joining a meeting was absolutely critical. And then I've joined that meeting. And the worst is when you're on holiday and you're traveling somewhere and you're sitting in the car and they insist it's a critical meeting and you join. And then it's absolutely not a useful meeting for anyone involved. And of course, I think that's a pet peeve for everyone. So I would definitely say, whether you're working with a team and everybody's from a different company or even in your own company, just be really clear on what are the things you're not comfortable with. What are the things that you actually like and the way you like to communicate. So now, Christian, it actually doesn't surprise me that you like the Amazon approach. You were so thorough in the preparation for this podcast that I see that you're very thoughtful in the things you do, that you like to be very mindful in the things you do. And I've seen that a lot in our interactions with each other. And whenever you and I will now have the opportunity to interact with each other, I'll always know, okay, this is the way Christian really likes to interact with someone.
No, thank you. Thank you. You mentioned NVIDIA. Jensen Huang, I heard in an interview, he said that it basically holds court. He has meetings with 60 people all the time. And his point is that he says he wants everybody of his direct reports to understand what he thinks about. So he invites basically everybody to one meeting. Do you see that work? What's your opinion on? I mean, it's the exact opposite of the Jeff Bezos approach.
So I certainly, certain parts of that resonate with me. What I would do at Roche, for instance, was I wouldn't just have meetings with my direct reports, but I would have meetings that included my direct reports and their direct reports. And exactly for this purpose, so that I could say to everyone at the same time with no filter which direction I thought we should be going in, how I saw the situation. However, it sounds initially very one directional. The other part that was a very important part of that equation was then also hearing from all of the leaders in the organization, how they saw our progress towards our shared outcomes, what was their understanding of our shared outcomes. And so that two-way discussion was really critical. There's a lot of discussion about when you should flatten hierarchies, when are hierarchies important roles. And I think it is important to make sure that everyone on the organization is on the same page, even though they may have very different roles in contributing towards the company outcome.
When we look at the Angeli Möller approach, and we have talked about now about Jensen Huang, I mean, his success speaks for itself, and also Jeff Bezos is very successful. They have completely different approaches. What is your approach?
So first of all, I would say that as with everyone, it's evolved over time. The approach I took with my first team 20 plus years ago isn't the approach that I take consistently now. So it's over time, it's changed and it's got a lot more consistent. And of course, recently, when I founded my own company, I started to build my new team in the company. One thing that I would say also colors my approach, so I'll mention it just so you know that it colors my approach, is that I take on always highly motivated, highly competent individuals. And the most important decisions you make are who you choose to work with. And so who you choose to hire, who you choose to contract, who you choose to collaborate with. And I'm very, very careful to choose extremely competent, highly motivated individuals. And when you have extremely competent, highly motivated individuals, your leadership style reflects that you're talking to a group of, again, highly motivated, highly competent individuals. And so one thing that is a bit of a cliche, but I still find very important, is to talk about the why. And I make sure that everybody understands why we're doing something. So why are we doing something? What is the reason that is motivating our company to exist? What is the reason for the founding of the organization? And then into the what. What does success look like? I remember somebody I worked with many years ago used to always ask me in meetings, what does excellent look like? What does excellent look like? What does good look like? I know these are cliche methods, but I still find it very helpful and very important as a leader to articulate what does excellent look like. So how can I make it as concrete as possible? How can I even make it as measurable as possible so that we know when we're doing great? And then on the how, very open on the how, very open. I'm intentionally not connecting, collaborating, or hiring people that need me to explain the how to them. I'm looking for them to bring, and you and I talked about this, their independent expertise, which is very different and coming from very different fields. And it's sometimes not what people might call expertise, but it's experience. Somebody has a lot of experience because they've worked in a particular space for several decades, and that experience makes them extremely valuable to the organization. And so I want them to have really those blank pieces of paper. And it really then as a leader is about how do you make sure it all fits together. So if you've got 20 superstars, how do you make sure that that comes together into the shared outcome? How do you create that collaborative environment? But what I absolutely don't want to do, and I'm actually not good at, is sitting down and saying, this is how I think you should be going about that. My former chief of staff at Roche, my first chief of staff at Roche, we were just texting each other this morning, and I was telling her I was getting ready to do the podcast, and she used to joke that she would never give me an intern. So she was very active in supporting the interns in the organization. She would say, you'd just be terrible with an intern, somebody who needs to come to you constantly to ask what is the next thing that they should do. That's the absolute wrong person to pair up with you.
Yeah, I think Steve Jobs, Jack Welch, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos would totally agree with you. And interestingly, Jensen Huang, I think it was an interview a month ago, he said that he's a little bit different because usually the advice is be careful with whom you hire, get the motivated, competent people on board, and then cluster them into A, B, C players. And Jack Welch was very radical back in the 80s and 90s. He said, okay, fire the C players because they just hold up the organization. And this is probably what you also mentioned with people who you have to tell constantly how to do things and what they need to do. Jensen Huang said he doesn't fire the C players. He pushes them to do better. And he prefers to break them and rebuild them instead of firing. What's your opinion when you have to assemble a team of A players to achieve great things? How do you deal with the other people, B and C players?
And I appreciate the honesty of your question because we don't talk about it very often, but then being a leader isn't just hiring great people. It's also managing times where you might have to let somebody go, where you might have to manage a performance issue. I think one of the things that I've learned over time and experience is just to be increasingly careful with those hires, to take time to appreciate what it means if you have to change up the team, of how disruptive and how difficult that can be if perhaps you made the wrong decision on an individual, or some circumstances changed, the outcome changed, the fit to the team changed. There was something that caused a shift in the culture and you have to make some changes. So there was a time where I would have been very quick in making a hiring decision. Now I work a lot with freelancers. That gives me a lot more freedom as well. So I like to put in that freedom. And I also, there would have been a time where I would have built up a team more quickly. I was speaking to a CEO at a company that's a client, so I can't talk about them, but that I really respect. And he was talking to me about the importance of having a stable and sustainable growth, so that you're not going through hiring and firing cycles. And that's something that I'd say, particularly in the past 5 years, I've started to gain a really deep, profound appreciation for. We know, particularly in Europe, what it means to go through these types of cycles and how exhausting for an organization that could be. So if you're in a position where, for whatever reason, somebody's not the fit for the team anymore, somebody's not the fit for the organization anymore, of course, you have to tackle it. You have to do it on behalf of the rest of the team. You have to do it because of your obligation towards the health of the company. You have to do it as sensitively and as humanely as you possibly can. But I think that taking a breath and sometimes saying, I don't need to immediately grow this team as big as possible. I can be more sustainable in my approach. I can build an organization that is more shock resistant should there be fluctuations in the market. I think that's something that has become a very profound part of my leadership in the last 5 years, just through experience.
Yes, very agreeable. I learned two, especially when it comes to firing, I learned two approaches in the 90s and early 2000s in the mobile industry. One was you can deal with a lot of crises on the market with simply stopping hiring. So the theory behind it is that 10 to 20% of employees fluctuate every year. So basically they leave the company, and when you stop hiring, the problem solves itself. And then I learned the other approach, which was very interesting because the company wanted to be very employee friendly. So they hired a lot of employees when the mobile industry was soaring. And then had a problem. It was about 2004, 2005, 2006, that the mobile industry was not doing very well in Europe. So they refused to stop hiring. So they continued hiring. And at one point, the company tipped because, I mean, revenues were declining, costs were going up, and they had to make tough decision. And the tough decision meant letting go of 60% of the employees. And the way they did it was very interesting because they didn't just call them in and say, okay, you're fired, go home. That in the next month, we will announce who will be fired. This paralyzed the entire organization for almost a year, because people, for 1 month, they were scared. They didn't know what to do. And then when they got the message, I mean, half of the employees were gone, and the work had still to be done. It was just, it didn't go very well. So the company then merged with another big company, and this was the end of the story of that. I agree to what you say, that hiring responsibly, I think, is a good starting point, and make it very smooth when you have to let go people, so that you don't paralyze the organization. Which leads back, let's go back to pharma and artificial intelligence. It was very interesting to hear your stories and your opinion about leadership. When we look at artificial intelligence in pharma, the more technical parts, you basically grew up with the development. What were the major milestones in pharma when we look at drug development and medical devices? What were the hallmark moments of artificial intelligence in pharma, in your opinion?
That's interesting. I think looking back, it's definitely at the point where small biotech companies started to have platforms where machine learning was a larger part of the drug discovery platform. So if I, end of 2018, beginning of 2019, I co-founded, together with some extremely innovative CEOs, an organization called the Alliance for Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare. So that organization we then launched at JP Morgan at the Biotech Showcase. And it is made up of companies that at the time were really championing the use of machine learning in healthcare, and particularly in drug discovery. So most of them were drug discovery companies. And at the beginning, it was met with a lot of skepticism by the pharmaceutical industry. So the membership was really, even today, it's still a lot of biotech companies. It's a lot of smaller companies. And what made a difference was when those companies started to bring things into clinical development. Because I said it at the very beginning of this podcast, in the end, does the medicine work? That should be what's important. That should always be what's most important. And as they started to show in clinical studies that these molecules where the drug discovery pathway had been much faster or much cheaper because of machine learning, were still highly effective in the clinical study with a good safety profile, then that was the point, I think, where people started to really sit up and pay attention. I still think we're still at the early years of that. It's been a big shift in terms of you can now be a lot more confident as an investor because you can look at things that you've always looked at. You can look at what is that clinical trial result? What is the path to the market? Something that you can really understand. Does the medicine actually work? And then on the other side, does the diagnostic tool actually work? And there on the diagnostic tool side, I would say that the FDA coming out with their software as a medical device guidelines in 2018, which looked at how can you use machine learning in the development cycle of software as a medical device. I think that was also really transformative as well. You saw this point where, at least for me, it felt like nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody really wanted to accept that there might be a different way, a change possible to, okay, we can't ignore it. We're going to have to put together some guidelines so that companies can actually bring solutions that have machine learning as part of their core to the market into hospitals. And so that was another key pivotal moment.
Yeah, it's good that things are evolving. What's the current state of artificial intelligence adoption in the pharma industry? You mentioned we are still early. So how do you see the current state?
You've got to, for me, make a difference between biotech and pharma. I think biotech are really seizing the opportunity. They have more market pressures, and now keep in mind, this is my opinion. Their market pressures make them a lot more open to using tools that will allow them to develop drugs more cheaply, more quickly. They're just, okay, this works, great, let's do it. And you see that high innovation in the smaller companies in terms of using artificial intelligence. I think with some of the larger companies, the transition to using not just machine learning, but machine learning and other physics-based tools has been more lethargic. You've seen sometimes the creation of innovation hubs, which are separate to the core business. So they're sort of over there, you're doing AI, but over here in the main business, we're not. I think that's definitely been a trend. And I think often it comes down again to the hires. So where do you have hires who are still focusing on, does the medicine work? Does the medicine not work? Not getting carried away with whether or not it uses artificial intelligence or machine learning, but at the same time, who are not afraid to bring in new technologies into the core business, who are ready to work out ways to mitigate the risk of bringing in any new technology, but start to bring that into the core business and the core way of doing things. So, yeah, I think there's this a lot more that can be done in drug discovery, also with combining physics-based modeling and machine learning. But the area I'm actually really excited about right now is pharma manufacturing. So in pharma manufacturing, I think that's an area where we have a tremendous opportunity for optimization, also for having really robust supply chains And I think machine learning and other computational technologies have a big role to play in yield optimization, in quality assurance, on both the diagnostic and on the pharmaceutical manufacturing side.
So we are still early in your opinion. So pharma is not fully on this artificial intelligence robotics trend yet. So there is still some room in the industry. Did I understand
You can always
that right?
point to examples. So I think it's come a long way in the last 5 years, and I think you can always pull together case studies if you want to, where you can show every single pharmaceutical company has taken machine learning and used it in a set of specific use cases and specific studies. And I would say the two pharmaceutical companies I've worked for were really pushing innovation. We're really making investments into these technologies. But in terms of it being embedded in the core business, instead of it just being, it's over here and it's a use case, it's an innovation too, it's just the way we do things now. We just do it this way. It's faster, it's more effective, it's cheaper, happens to use new technologies, but it's just the way we do business now. That I think is not there yet. And I think there's a lot more potential to make these new technologies part of the core business. I mean, of course, in another industry, you wouldn't even call them new technologies anymore. It's almost revealing that I use that terminology, that I'm from the pharmaceutical industry. But I see that there is just so much scope to make it part of the core business, to even how do you engage with your customers? How do you get the information out to key opinion leaders and hospital partners? How do you make sure that all of your internal employees can communicate and find all of the information that they need very quickly? Again, you know, my passion right now for manufacturing, how do you get that process to be as high quality, as high yield as possible? I think there's just a lot more to do, which on one hand is like, oh, really? We've been at this a while, and look at in the industries, look at what they're doing. But at the same time, I think then, okay, let's put our noses to the grindstone. Let's keep working at this. Let's show through tangible examples how this can go from being an innovation project or an innovation hub to just being something that's actually part of your core way of working.
Then my perception is a little bit distorted from a social media bubble. I always thought artificial intelligence nowadays is everywhere. It's generally adopted. Everybody's talking about AI. Everybody's using some sort of generative AI. NVIDIA stock price soared. I think it was in 8x in the last 12 months. So I thought we are done, and we are at the peak of the bubble. And you mentioned that there is still some room to grow in the industries to embed really these technologies into the core business. So we are not there yet, which probably is also true for other industries. It means there's still opportunity on the market for investors yet.
Oh, absolutely, I think so. And it's an interesting time because it's not just about machine learning, but for any company that doesn't find a way to make the right tool part of its core business, if there's something out there that would improve your core business, and for whatever reason, you don't manage to incorporate it into your core business, then you've lost the opportunity, because one of your competitors will manage to do it. One of your competitors will say, here's something that makes my business much better, whatever it might be, new computing technology, a new molecular breakthrough, a new chemical breakthrough. And they say, I will make it part of my core business. I will take this new opportunity. And you miss the boat, and you're messing around with some on the side innovation project while they're doing this. Yeah, then, you know, they're winners and losers in the industry, and you see that play out over time.
Yeah, I think it was 90s, mid-90s, from 1995 to 2000, 1999, when the internet was new. And when I was working on this research project, I mean, we had our basic ideas laid out on the table. We just overestimated the speed of a realistic development on the market and how quickly companies can adopt these new technologies. So all these autonomous driving, for example, or this logistical evolvement that we see today were already there in principle as an idea in 1996, 1997, 1998. Just took 2 or 3 decades to move forward, and I think we are still not fully finished there. When I look now at artificial intelligence in medicine and in pharma, what's a realistic perspective on this topic, in your opinion? What will AI do in drug development and bringing products to patients? And what is a little bit too premature to talk about?
Well, I think one part to keep in mind is when it's machine learning and when it's not. So for wholly understandable reasons, anything that involved a computer was labeled AI or is labeled AI for a long time now. Anything involves a computer, it's AI. But drug discovery involves a lot of physics-based modeling. And the physics-based modeling is really, really critical in looking at how you have these drug-target interactions and optimizing these drug-target interactions. So I think for me, when I'm looking at different companies, one part is to look at how they're addressing this in their pitch deck. Do I see some awareness of this fact? Do I just see a lot of things about AI all over the place on every single slide? I think the other part is just data. This it was tricky. I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago, and they were talking about the adoption of machine learning in drug discovery and where it's working and where it's not. And during the conversation, what was a little challenging for me is that there still doesn't seem to be this widespread awareness that you need data to do any machine learning, and that you need vast quantities of data to do effective machine learning, and that the quality of that data is then key to the quality of the successful prediction or outcome of the model. And where you sometimes see horror stories where you have the investment into, I don't know, the data scientists, the software, the algorithms, but not the investment into the data. I mean, you can see very quickly how that's going to play out. They have a fantastic new model. I could go on to GitHub or GitLab, find thousands of fantastic models and fantastic model libraries and just pick any of them off the shelf and use them. Who cares? So what? Do you have any data to actually train them on? Do you have the right data to train them on? Do you have enough data to train them on? And I think it's still going to your question, what is the actual reality? I think there's unfortunately still these big gaps in biological data, in healthcare data. And those gaps in the data are the real bottleneck of, it's not, I don't have the algorithm or I don't have the compute power. It's actually, you don't have the data, you can't do anything. And so I think that's a key reality in the drug discovery component. I think in later stages of the pharmaceutical industry, so in clinical development, in manufacturing, in commercialization, I just think in some areas the adoption has been slower, but I see it picking up now. I think, you know, it's not like the story I told you in 2016 where somebody just turned around to me and said, I don't believe in artificial intelligence. That certainly doesn't happen anywhere anymore. And whether they know it or not, everybody is, of course, using artificial intelligence every day because it's embedded in all of the applications that they're using. And so it's gradually seeping its way into every aspect of life. And that makes the adoption into industry, into all industries, faster. People get used to it, myths are bust, it becomes more acceptable, and it finds their way into each part of work.
Great points. There are 2 points that I would like to ask some questions and dig deeper that I think are highly important. And the first part is data. I mean, in the investment community, I think the dream is quite simple. You catch the good companies early, and then you invest a little bit of money and you get a 1000x or 2000x 10 years down the road. And there is always this notion that at one point in time, artificial intelligence will replace investors. And then I looked through the data lens on the NVIDIA story and thought, okay, I mean, if that's really the point, and if it's so easy to find these companies, then why didn't anybody buy NVIDIA in 1993 or in 2003 or in 2013? And the answer is from the artificial intelligence landscape is quite easy. Yeah, because artificial intelligence was not there. And then I thought, wait a minute. In 2013, the overall perception, the data behind NVIDIA was it's a cyclical business. It's not soaring. Chips is a commodity. So why should the stock price go up? Then I thought, okay, when artificial intelligence access these kind of data, wouldn't it come to the same conclusion like a human and say, okay, there's no upside in that, and yet NVIDIA soared. So I tried to use this thinking then to look at the pharma side and say, okay, when we look at innovation in general, can artificial intelligence really be helpful in replacing humans? Because I think the big success stories evolve out of a situation where humans make a decision, like Jens Nuang with the Kudo platform, where almost no data is available. It's just intuition and a gut feeling. Do you think that artificial intelligence can evolve to a point where it can work without data and become an intuitive system? Is that a possible future?
So I think, first of all forms of artificial intelligence rely on data. That's how they learn, right? That's how all forms of intelligence work. So whether it's human intelligence or artificial intelligence, all of them need data. So everything you, Christian, have seen your whole life, everything you've read your whole life, that is informing your intelligence. That's how intelligence works. I think that what is maybe one thing that stood out while we were talking for me was also looking at anecdotes. So you will always be able to point to this company, this individual, and say, was it predictable? Because if we look at statistics, statistics is saying what the majority of outcomes will be. It's not saying what all of the outcomes will be. It is always saying to you, I don't know, let's take it right down. What will happen to 99.9% of companies? But it's not saying to you what will happen to every single company. What will happen to 99.9% of chip manufacturers? Not what will happen to every chip manufacturer. So I think that's one thing that to remember is machine learning is based on statistics. This is how statistics tells us what is the likelihood of an outcome. And then that prediction is only good as the data it was fed with. What I would say is I see new technologies, all new technologies, as complementing human intelligence. So I think that artificial intelligence has the ability to complement human intelligence. There are some things that AI can do very well, and we can use it to make our lives easier. I'll give you an example. I hate doing graphic design. I use generative AI for graphic design all the time now. I've never been good at graphic design. But I also still contract a real graphic designer to do the final overview and outlay. And if it's really important for the branding or for a client, then I actually have some very good humans who I contract. So it's very complementary. You have the skill set, and then you have what the machine can do that complements the human skill set. And I never go into these, sci-fi horror stories of we'll all be replaced by artificial intelligence one day. I think jobs will look different, and how you predict investments will look different. But we've seen quants in the investment community for a very long time now. And if now they can enhance the work that they're doing with the use of machine learning, of course, they've already been doing that for quite a while now. It's helping many of them make more effective predictions. It's helping many of them also make absolutely terrible predictions, because if you have biased data, you get biased outcomes with artificial intelligence in the same way you do with human intelligence.
Yeah, that's the interesting point. I mean, if I'm investing, I'm up in the quantum models. I didn't hear about any model that is really outstanding, like the big human investors that created above average returns. This is quite interesting. And so the question that revolves in my mind is, what is this intelligence and intuition? So is there still some space for humans at the end of the day to make intuitive decisions on limited data? And from what I heard from you is that basically artificial intelligence needs large amount of polished data, of good data to predict outcomes, probably faster and better than humans, but without data, it's impossible.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting looking at good data because there are lots of methods that we work on for dealing with gaps in data, in healthcare right now. And for the past few years, they're looking at what are the gaps in data about women's healthcare, where most studies were done on men. So how do you deal with gaps if you're trying to translate those findings to women? In the end, there are ways in which you can say, okay, this happens to a man in that clinical study, so this will probably be what happens to a woman. But still, we need to actually generate some real data so we can figure it out. And the same as you might say, this is what happens to somebody with this genetic profile. So I'm guessing that somebody with that genetic profile, this will happen. I make a prediction, but still the best thing is to go out and generate some data for that ethnic group, for that genetic profile, so you know how the medication will really work for them. I think that when we look at intuition, so I mentioned earlier in our discussion that I worked as a research scientist in neurodegeneration and looked at modeling the healthy chemical synapse and how thoughts are formed. I think in the end here, you can think of yourself as just human intelligence, artificial intelligence, two forms of intelligence. You're still the product of all of the data that you've been trained on your entire life. That's who you are. Angeli, I'm a product of everything I've seen and experienced in my entire life. And also, of course, the biological component of how my brain is structured and how I perceive that information. And so, yes, as an intelligent entity, there will be some patterns that I recognize more quickly. And where you have these outstanding investors who have found a way to recognize patterns very, very effectively and therefore make those right calls, those right decisions. And I think that particularly in these low data scenarios, that's still going to be such a key game changer in the investment community, in the medical world, in the technological world.
Yeah, which leads back to select your people carefully at the end of the day, because the data they produce train your own human biological intelligence model. When we think about data production, how can we produce data? I mean, Apple is working on, for example, Apple Watch, and they are working also on Vision Pro. And is this the way forward to produce data that can be used later on from the pharma industry to produce better drugs?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is to really produce the right data, and you're much more likely to produce the right data if you already know how you're going to use the data. So just producing data and hoping it will be useful later can work out. But if you actually know how you're going to use the data to achieve a specific outcome, then you're much more likely to be successful. So I think that's one thing, is thinking about, and it's called real world data in the medical industry. So how are you going to use that real world data from wearable devices to be effective in designing a clinical trial, and thinking about that in advance is going to significantly increase your likelihood of success. And then the other part is if you look at accessibility of data. So data exists, okay. Do you have access to that data? Can you access it? And one of the things that can be very interesting for an investor to look at then is what sort of proprietary data does an organization have? If the data is really making a difference to the success of their algorithms, the success of their predictions, are they just using data that everybody else has, or do they have data that only they have? And it's very high quality, it's very useful, but only they have it. And then you can see that competitive advantage play out. So that's another interesting thing to look at.
I mean, two further questions. One, my personal question. I'm a man. I don't like go to the doctors. It's just very time consuming here in Austria. So you sit for hours in the waiting room for a 15 minutes checkup, which is not good for me, but sometimes good for the doctors because they have not so many people in the waiting room. For the healthcare system overall, it would be best then when everybody does their annual checkup and when you diagnose diseases early. and don't wait until the last minute. My personal dream is to have a digital personal assistant that monitors my health 24/7 and then links in the right specialist at the right point in time when something goes off. What is this, in your opinion, a feasible future in the near term, or is it something that will never happen in our lifetime?
I mean, it's very feasible and it's there for some people. It's a question of
Really?
cost, Christian. So it's, do you have the money to pay for that kind of healthcare treatment, to have those sorts of devices? So absolutely, and particularly when you're in China, when you're in the US, you see these sorts of technologies increasingly becoming part of daily life. It's just who has the money to pay for it? And that's the differentiator when you see who has it, who doesn't have it. Can you afford to have smart devices that track your sleep, that track your cardio rhythms, that then transmit them? Can you afford to pay a subscription to a network of doctors? These subscriptions exist across Europe, I certainly know, and there are many set up in the US and China, where then you will have key opinion leaders, doctors, specialists who get flagged, who get notified if there are any discrepancies in your data, who will be able to provide a specialist consultation. It just costs money.
Mm.
The question is, when do these sorts of healthcare options become available for everyone? When do you have that equitable quality of healthcare?
What's your prediction? Is this a point in time? Is this something that we can reach to make such a diagnostic possibility available to everybody?
I think the economics have to work. So things happen when the economics work, and I think you and I think all of your listeners know that. So let's maybe look at the National Health Care System, the NHS in the UK. It's paid by taxpayers. As it becomes more economical to provide digital solutions, because it reduces the overall cost of the NHS burden for the British government, then more of these solutions will be introduced. There's obviously, though, and this is where visionary leadership comes in and the individual comes in, you need to have somebody who has that vision and who's willing to put in that upfront capital. Because to go from a legacy system to a digitally enabled system, you do recoup those savings, and we've seen that time and time again, but you need somebody who was ready to make that upfront investment because they have that vision. And but then the model can work because it's cheaper for the taxpayer, it's cheaper for the government sustainably to provide these sorts of options. You have more preventative care. We all know that that's less expensive than trying to treat chronic diseases over time that you didn't catch early enough. And the same in Germany, where I am now. So how can you reduce overall healthcare costs? How can you reduce soaring insurance costs? You can start to have this earlier detection. You can see, okay, I see that very few people are going to their regular screenings, their regular checkups. So what are the things that I could provide in that person's home on a solution to reduce the burden, to make it easier, to have the flags? One is to have the data tracking, but the other thing is to have those behavioral nudges that really good applications give us, and start to change the way we act and think. So I think it as the economics play out, then it's inevitable. And you see this in many countries already. So I was in China just last year, and just looking at everything that is accessible to somebody living in Shanghai, for instance. Not everywhere in China, but in the bigger cities, they have exactly what I think you're describing.
Yeah, it's amazing how advanced these Southeast Asian countries are. So it's Korea, China, Japan, also down Singapore. You worked in 120 countries, or led teams in over 120 countries. And how how do you see the world when it comes to innovation? I mean, as a European, I always like to think okay, Europe is the most advanced region. Then I started traveling to Asia 10 years ago, and it was always like a trip to the future. How do you see it?
As you said, I led teams which were in over 120 countries. I have not gone, unfortunately, to see all of these people and all of these countries. So there's a lot of traveling involved, but also a lot of virtual work involved. I would say for anyone, whether you're European, Asian, American, from anywhere else, African, it's important to have an awareness for your biases. So to not get, for instance, a Eurocentric viewpoint. I don't know if you've been in international meetings, and sometimes it can be amusing when you listen to people who have got a viewpoint where they really think, you know, the innovation is in their space. There's nothing to learn from any of the other regions of our planet, and they really think that they know everything. But I would say that's a danger that everyone in business has to watch out for, be aware of when you might have tunnel vision because of your particular background. When I look at innovation in particularly the machine learning space, I'm going to be a bit boring here because it often comes into what were the data availability, data privacy regulations, how can you access data, how easy is it? And that has a big effect on where you see the growth of certain industries. Were they able to collect endless data on all of their end users without having to worry about end user privacy considerations? And if so, suddenly they have much stronger algorithms than anybody else or any of their competitors. So I think that's something that leads to different bubbles of innovation that we've seen in machine learning based industries over time. I think the interesting part as well is also looking at where you have a sustainable growth. Some investors, you know, maybe are looking for something that will be big, grow big quickly, maybe won't exist in 10 years, but it went through a boom. And I think for me, I'll say honestly, I'm always very interested in where you have a sustainable growth trajectory, where you have also a country, a policy set, but also a CEO, a leader, a founder who's interested in that sustainable trajectory, who's looking to build something to last. And I find that very interesting to do. And different, I would say it's, for me, I wouldn't be able to say one country, because as leaders change, as the president or the prime minister or the policy, the political party changes in different countries, you see different shifts in policy, and then they encourage or support different models, whether it's a big boom or this maybe more sustainable growth trajectory.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. The technological differences are sometimes big, and it's biases. It's interesting. When I'm close to 50 and I grew up in the 80s, 89, with the pictures from China, where people were mostly on bicycles. And now it's completely different. So China of 89 doesn't exist anymore, basically, and it's tremendously involved. But when someone didn't travel any time to China, they still might live with the picture of Europe is so innovative and China is far behind, and it can be really fun. When we look at this data, I mean, from my personal perspective, I would love to have my health data accessible for companies across the globe, but there are also different, I would say, different ways of life to treat data and to deal with data. What are the ethical considerations that we have to deal in healthcare these days when it comes to data generation and making sure that the data is safe for our patients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm going to say one thing about geography, and then I'm going to come back to the data question. I think the other thing that makes serving and working with a global community so exciting is you can't also really say China or Europe, because in different parts of China, you have such different situations with the healthcare system, with the economics, with the technology access. And of course, you and I know the same is true in different parts of Europe. If I go and travel to different parts of Germany, different parts of Austria, you see very different setups and very different socioeconomic circumstances, and being able to talk in terms of archetypes, market archetypes, is important and makes sense for a business. But one of the things that personalized solutions have allowed us to do is really look at how do I create solutions that can be tailored to every member of the community and recognize these huge diversity we have even within the same country. So I just wanted to mention that. With accessing data, so this is one where I would say I probably have what many would call a European viewpoint on this. So if you look at the AI Act, for instance, the EU AI Act, or even if you look at the President Biden's act last year on artificial intelligence safety. For me, I think the regulation is very important. I think sensible regulation that allows economic growth, but at the same time protects the general population is really important when it comes to any type of machine learning, but also when it comes to healthcare in particular. Now, it's an unpopular opinion. I work with people all the time who say, no, I absolutely hate all of these regulations and guardrails. But I've always worked in a heavy regulated industry. So I'm not, there's no part of me that gets worried. I think if you read through the documents, and again, if you're used to working in a regulated industry, you see that they're all quite manageable. So I'll give you an example from the EU AI Act. In there, one of the examples they give, they talk about hiring, so software for hiring people, and how to manage biases in something. So it doesn't immediately exclude all applicants who have dark-colored skin just because the algorithm was built with an inherent bias. So it might sort people based on, did they go to a particular university? That's not a racist sorting mechanism. But then that university might not have an intake of people of color. So you have a secondary screening criteria there. You have a bias just because of the way you built your algorithm that you wouldn't have intended, but it suddenly comes out. And has just very simple rules about how, making it possible to look at how you tested the software, just publishing how you tested the software, and having some basic good practices about testing for these sorts of biases. And I think when I look at these, my response is you should be doing that anyway. Why on earth would you not do that anyway? And if there's a helpful little set of checklists that help you make sure that you're not accidentally doing something that would hurt your business tremendously. I mean, if you get caught for accidentally having racist hiring practices, you're going to massively hurt your business just through having made a foolish mistake. So why would you not want a simple checklist, a simple set of rules that is going to stop you from shooting yourself in the foot as you go into this new and exciting technology where you might in your company not have had a lot of experience before? So I think that's one thing that I think when I look through these regulations. And I think on healthcare access, I do think in the end, it is critical that the data become available. So I sat on the management board of a charity called RareX, which is for patients with ultra rare diseases, and it helped patients to make their data accessible to researchers, because obviously very few patients with ultra rare disease, very little data available to develop new medicines. And it was so important to discovering new medicines for what is mostly a patient population made up of children, extremely vulnerable children suffering from debilitating rare diseases with very few treatment options. The only solution is to make their data available and to make it safely available. So I think it is important to reduce the cost and reduce the burden of data access. And I think that's a great way to stimulate research into new cures, research into new medications, new diagnostics, to lower the burden for that innovation. And at the same time, I think there are technical best practices that allow you to protect patient data. So we have our banking data, which we also expect to be protected. There is lots of data that we expect to have protected, and I think there are really well-established mechanisms for protecting that data. It's just important that if you're an organization that is handling patient data, you take the time to make sure you've got the right experts to make sure you know how to do it.
Yeah, these are big challenges, I guess, for governments in the future, because I mean, innovation is global. So when I look at the teams I worked with in the last 20 years, I mean, they were practically assembled from all over the world. I mean, you had Asia, Australia, Africa, the United States, Latin America. And when I look at now at artificial intelligence, after our conversation, artificial intelligence needs data, needs access to data. So these global teams need access to data to train their models. And we also need to make sure that the data is not biased. So when we only feed biased data into these models, we get biased decisions. And then the next part is security. I mean, when you look at Europe, Europe completely forgot about the digital revolution. So we have no Apple, we have no Google, we have no Microsoft here in Europe. China does. They did it. All our data is now basically managed by the United States. How can we make sure in Europe that we don't miss the artificial intelligence trend? Because it means at the end of the day, when we do not have a footprint in this area, we will get a solution from other regions. And these regions will then feed their models with their cultural background, with their ideas how life should be, and we get this outcome. How important is that we do something here in Europe with that and don't down-regulate everything so that we experience the same direction like we did in the digital revolution, that we then buy the solutions from other regions?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's not as black and white of regulation is bad and stops investment, or capitalism is bad and stop, and hurts the general population. I think for me, it's about choosing the right regulation at the right time to stimulate economic growth, and at the same time to make sure that you protect the culture and the quality of life that you're proud of in your continent, in your home country. And let's take, for an example, the European Union. There are certain values that are shared by the European Union. How do you make sure that you preserve them even as new technologies arise? At the same time, how do you make sure that it can become an economic powerhouse, that it can, as you say, not be dependent on innovation coming from elsewhere? How can it make sure that the tax money that is generated by these innovations, that the new investment that is generated by these innovations is actually landing in the EU? I would say there's a lot of innovation in the EU. The question is, when you get the scale up, is the revenue from that scale up actually landing back in the European Union? That's the question where I think we both know, no, that's not always happening right now. What I would say is in terms of having a global team work on shared resources, that's actually at the moment not possible in most cases. So you would have the data in a particular jurisdiction, in a particular geography, and the team that work with it would need to be in that geography and able to work with it there. So that's particularly with healthcare data. There are examples of other data types where you can work more effectively as a global team, but with healthcare data, you usually need to work behind the firewall of the geography in which.
If I may throw something in when I think about health, but then it's biased automatically. I mean, basically, when it's in the jurisdiction, you only get access to healthcare data from the jurisdiction. Then you automatically have the population of this jurisdiction in the data, but not anyone else.
And then there are methods, technical methods. So federated learning would be a really popular method there, where you would train it in different environments. So once I worked on a project where we trained our models on data in France, and then we trained it on data in the US. And then, of course, to enter the market in China, it had to be revalidated on relevant patient populations for that indication in China. And so you have your data doesn't move, but your model moves.
Okay.
Is the concept behind federated learning.
Is that acceptable then by the governments that you can do that legally?
That's absolutely acceptable. So the data doesn't move, but the model moves, and that's the way. It's actually important to do that, because you want to show that, say you're developing software as a medical device, you want to know that it's effective against the population that you're going to go and treat. And we know that different populations have different makeups, and that different medicines and different diagnostics are effective in different ways.
Yeah, challenging. What advice would you give European governments when they want to support biotechs and drug development? In your opinion, what should they do in the next 10 years to foster a thriving biotech landscape here in Europe?
I think one of the things, so I mentioned really at the beginning of our podcast, is the European Institute for Bioinformatics, which makes freely available both data resources and models and informatics resources, and even tools that don't need you to be a professional programmer. So I think having resources like the European Institute for Bioinformatics, that has a proven track record of having grown a very healthy biotech ecosystem. And if we have their headquarter in Hingston, Cambridge, you see a big biotech industry that's grown up all around it, very successful biotech companies that are all leveraging the resources that they make available. I think another thing that is very effective is to reduce the cost of compute. So we know that compute costs, and then that's just energy costs, are escalating across Europe. And so how do you reduce the cost of compute? Again, you have the European Health Data Cloud. We have in Jülich in Germany here, we have the big computing facility. But I'll talk a little bit more about the UK. We have the Quantum Computing Centre, which has just been built. And right now they're fitting it up with all of the quantum computers. I was just there visiting a few weeks ago, and I lead for the Science and Technology Facilities Council, their working group on innovation and business. So it's really on commercializing these assets, on having spin-out companies from universities come and use those resources to reduce their operating costs, but also then having mid-sized companies and even large companies that are willing to move jobs or keep jobs in the UK come and use those resources, and as an incentive to grow. So where there are emerging technologies, it's really how are you looking at ways to reduce the overhead, reduce the operating costs for companies that are coming in and leveraging those technologies? Because there's some things, I mean, take quantum computing, it's a massive overhead. Very few people can afford to go out and access quantum computing resources. So how do you have a national resource and then create grants and programs that make it non-bureaucratic and very easy for small and medium-sized and even large corporations to come and use those facilities?
So let's repeat the buzzwords. Low energy cost, I think, is very important, which we don't see in Europe since 2022. And this really turns down innovation, because I think all new areas are energy intense. So we need competitive energy prices, and yet they should be sustainable at the same time. The production of energy. And the second one is bureaucracy. So I think this is also important to make it less bureaucratic.
But, you know, I mean, you know this, Christian, I recently founded a GmbH in Germany, and guess how long it took between me having the confirmation that the money was in my bank account, the startup money, and then my notary getting back the confirmation that I was in the German registry.
So you founded it already, so
Yeah.
it can't be that long. So it's how long did it take?
Less than a day.
Less than a day, really?
Less than a day. And I know other founders who founded their companies 10 years ago, and they said this was weeks, Angeli. This is
Yeah.
prepare for this to take weeks. And so the progress is happening. I was like, all right, I'll be waiting
I
all
in Germany,
summer months.
I didn't expect less than a day. So I
And in
always
Berlin as well. Yeah, it's maybe another thing. But so things really are happening. You know, we've been talking about this problem for a while, so it's good to see it moving. It's good to see that things are paying off, that things in German bureaucracy have been digitized. I think we all still know there's a long way to go. But it does show you the change it can make. And so one part is to make those investments. But when we talk about sustainability, I'll give you an example. We talk about energy costs. And we know why energy costs are so high right now. We know the trade-off decisions governments are having to make. What is very interesting for me right now is looking into companies that are looking into developing new technologies that fundamentally reduce the cost of compute power, so that the actual technology is different. So you're looking at completely different frameworks, completely different chip designs, I was at a computing center recently where they had reduced the energy usage by 20% just by having a different framework. So they hadn't changed the hardware, they had just changed the way the jobs were distributed across the hardware, and they had immediately reduced their energy cost by 20%. So I think looking at how to just make computing less costly, less energy intensive, is a really interesting and exciting space. You know, every challenge, escalating energy costs, leads to some companies floundering and saying, oh my God, I can't survive. This is the worst thing ever. Government has to step in and subsidize this. And you see other companies that are saying, this is an opportunity. Now there is an unmet need on the market. There is something that is hurting everyone. How do I get really innovative and start to go after that and find a solution? I think that's an area right now as I said, with low energy computing, I find really exciting.
Selection pressure is not a bad thing sometimes. That's true.
Good or bad, it's a reality, and then you get to see how it plays out.
Yeah, we have to adapt. You mentioned that you left Big Pharma to found a new company. So when I did leave a big company 20 years, almost 20 years ago, the reaction from my family was, why are you doing that? Are you crazy? What was your motivation to found your own consultancy company?
It's interesting. It is funny, and I'm sure your listeners again have had this experience that a lot of people come up and let you know how they feel about it. So first of all, there's a lot of entrepreneurism in my family. So it was more, I was a bit the odd one out who said, no, I'm going to be just being an employee, albeit a global executive in a huge company, but I'm still good with that. I don't mind having a boss if it's the right boss. And so I was more the odd one out, and it's more common in my family to be somebody who starts your own business and runs your own business. And that's over multiple generations. That's been a common trend. So I didn't have in mind that this was what I was going to do, but the company I did work for, Roche, it's a really great company, very supportive company, and they allowed me to do advisory and consulting work beside my Roche contract. So I had then a contract with UK Research and Innovation, and I had a scientific advisor contract with a biotech company called Multiomic Health, which do fantastic research into metabolomic diseases. And I've been working with them for a few years now. So I already had then this track record of having done this consultancy for a while. And I was seeing that to be really effective in the pharmaceutical industry as well, that in the roles that I had, there was it was really clear what I needed to do. It was really clear, okay, if you want this team to be really successful, you've been in these sorts of roles 7 years now, if you want to continue in going down this route of success, this is exactly what it would look like. And it was pretty clear what it would look like. I knew what would need to be done for the next step. And I just thought, do you know, it feels a little bit too obvious. It's a road, you're on it, you know exactly what you need to do. Some of it is just keep doing the same stuff and you're just on that road. And I thought, I have, you know, made good investments, started probably like many of your listeners again, I started investing in the stock market myself in my 20s, every month, steady portion of my salary, put it aside, used it to build up my own personal investment portfolio. And so I just felt like, you know, I'm in a good place. I'm in a place where I have 2 great clients already. I'm in a place where I feel very comfortable in terms of taking on more risk, more adventure. And I see that there's really something useful I can do. I see that there are people who are reaching out to me in my network, reaching out to me across the industry, who are actually getting some use out of what I can do for them. And so that was the initial trigger for really going into this. But as I then spent more time in it and more thought in it, I think then it became something much bigger than just Angeli as an individual going out and doing this and that. It became then clearer where the opportunities were in the global market. It became also where the opportunities for expanding into something much larger with multiple partners sat. And so that's really the journey that I'm just beginning now in the early stages of, is going from just being Angeli as one individual, going out and doing work, to saying, okay, there are so many requests for more support. There are so many opportunities that are just sitting there. How do we now start to grow? Then that takes us back to our earlier leadership discussion, grow sustainably, so that it's the right people. And one of the things I'm spending time doing now is also just talking to people to see who it has a similar passion for growing businesses, who would be somebody to partner up with, who is equally interested in making a difference through technical expertise, through technical consulting, but also who has a passion for growing a business, not just, you know, another scientist, another engineer, but somebody who really is interested in the commercial side as well.
What's your mission with Sequoia? Sequoia Growth is, I think, the name of your firm.
And I think the mission is exactly the same as my personal mission has been for a long time. So we talked a bit about my career over this discussion. It started off with me working in the lab doing genetic engineering, doing stem cell experiments, then moved into me doing machine learning work and research using different forms of machine learning. And then it has this long industry aspect to it. Now, the quantum computing. For me, what is deeply frustrating is when you have the opportunity to improve your product, you have the opportunity to improve your outcome, you have the opportunity to have a more successful business, and for whatever reason, you're not using all the tools available to you. There's something there that could make what you do cheaper, better, faster, and you're just not using it for whatever reason. And what it frustrates me. You probably can see it. I get tense. Oh, that's really frustrating to see that happening. And so where I can step in now together with my whole company and really unlock whatever that bottleneck is. And I find actually a lot of it is educational programs as well as other things, as well as sort of practical advice or use cases. But a lot of it is also educational programs. If we can unlock that, so I don't care if it's machine learning, I don't care if it's a different tool, but if we can unlock it to allow your product to have a better impact, to allow your business to grow, then I just find that tremendously satisfying. And why did I move away from academia? Because you can, you know, bring new technologies to market through working on them in research and then handing them over to a company. But I think I just saw so many things that were not sustainable, where it was great technology, it was great solution. And that's why I do keep one foot connected to the academic community, but it just wasn't having that real world impact at scale sustainably that it could have. It was just losing its way on the way to market. And I think that's why I really work with people who have a clear understanding that having a commercially successful product is how you have a really societally impactful product as well.
And it's an art by itself to translating a technology, groundbreaking technology, into a useful business. It's not only the product. To really scale it up, you need to turn it into a business.
And I was talking to a client recently, and they just wanted me to come and talk about customer centricity. So they just wanted me to come and talk to their team about customer centricity. Their team was made up of really fantastic programmers, software developers, and scientists. And it was just, how do you come? And they wanted me, particularly because of my scientific background and academic background, to just come in and say, yeah, got to start with the customer. Like, is any of this relevant to your end user, to your customer? And let's start there.
What do you think about this approach?
It's definitely, I mean, I can't say enough about it. I love great science. I think there's a place for basic research. That's a very important place. I spent years of my life on basic research. So for any of your listeners who are not familiar with the term of basic research, it would be, an example would be when I worked for 4 years on just creating a model of the human chemical synapse. you can do millions of different things when you fully understand how the human brain works. So when you have a working good model of the human brain, but it's not saying I'm doing it so I can do this with it. It's saying I'm doing it now becomes a basic resource that furthers human understanding of the world as basic research. And I think that's important, and I think it has its place, but I'm so passionate about starting with the customer, and that's been something that's just grown for me. I would say a lot of influence from the big pharma companies I've worked for, but also I worked for Thomson Reuters as a consultant there, and it's just, if you really don't deeply understand what your customer wants or needs, you're just going to end up with some nice bit of science lying, gathering dust, unused, unappreciated, no benefit for society. Consumerism is what drives exciting innovations. You know, what would it take to get Christian to go to the doctor every single year? Do you have a deep understanding of that psyche? If you're the customer, do I really understand what that would look like? Am I even asking the right question? And you know, this is the question that, or is the question, what would be a faster way to have frequent diagnoses? And then maybe you never go to the doctor, but you have something at home, which is convenient and quick and part of something you would do anyway, like brushing your teeth. And so it's really, do you deeply understand what is the problem you're trying to solve? And it goes, of course, into the psychology. Do you understand all of the psychology that's at play here in terms of what the customer needs? Sometimes you hear product managers or product owners saying what they really need, going beyond what they perhaps first tell you they need.
Yeah, this is a great way. It's really amazing listening to you. Time flies, so we are over 2 hours in our conversation. Is there any topic, before we wrap up, is there any topic that we should give more space in our conversation that we didn't talk about and you would like to address?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think so one of the reasons is, and you and I talked about this, Christian, my motivation for coming on the podcast today. And so one part is I'm really, as I grow Sequoia Growth, so my company is called Sequoia Growth, I'm looking for also partners who bring something to the table. So either a good chunk of experience or a particular specialization that they're bringing to the table. And are also sharing what you've heard from me today, this passion for growing a sustainable business. So I'm looking for collaborators on that front and partnerships on that front. And then I think just, so I'll admit I have quite a large client load at the moment, but also it's always important to just be saying, if you're in a position where your company could benefit from the type of consulting we do, from the type of specialist offers that we have, then please do reach out. It will be obvious from what we put out with this podcast, how you can reach out to us, and LinkedIn's always a great way. And we're here and we're looking to really select those projects and clients that where we're confident we can make an impact and really grow sustainable innovation to improve your business.
That's great. That's a great mission. That's a great mission. How would the collaboration with clients look like when they work with you?
So we have mainly two types. So what we often have is that somebody wants something highly specialized. So people don't come to Sequoia Growth for something that you can get anywhere. And also, I would say we don't accept things where we think that we're not going to really make a difference here. So we've said no to a few contracts already. What we do is we first of all look and we'll work with you on what is the thing that you're actually trying to solve. So maybe there's an NDA in place, but I won't want a contract of any other type. And it's just, what is the problem that you're actually trying to solve? Because we don't want to get into a bigger commitment with each other when we're not convinced that we'll actually be able to make a difference to your problem, or where you're not convinced of that as well, and where we're not very confident that you fully understand your problem statement. So we want to get to a point, and that we do without a contract. So yes, we do with an NDA, but without a commercial agreement, we do this problem shaping. Do we really understand the problem? And when we reach a point where we say, yes, this is something where we could really make a difference, where you, as the client, say, this is actually going to help to grow my business, I see the multiple fold return that I'm going to get from this engagement, then we come in and we put together the team. Now, one of the things, and we talked earlier in this podcast about sustainable growth of a team, is it may often be better to bring in freelancers. And why is that? I have a very large network of people who've worked in the industry for a long time, and they are not looking to become an employee again at a stage in their career where they maybe have a huge executive role, or they're leading a big research institute, or they're a professor at a very well-established university. And so then it can become, how do you handpick and compose exactly the right team to be able to solve what is relevant to that company? So I think it's not, whereas you might work with some groups and it's who are the employees you have in-house, it's rather a question of exactly who are the talented individuals that exist in the world who can come in and help to solve this problem. And that's the way we work.
I like that approach. It's a definitely a helpful approach, especially when it comes to problems that companies can't solve by themselves. Then they need external expertise, and only in-source and only build what you really need very often on a daily basis in the company. And sometimes problems disappear when they are solved once, and you don't need a new department in the company. Sorry.
I'd also say it may be in the discussion, the problem solving bit, without any commercial agreement, you figure out the solution on your own. We're just happy, you know, it helps our reputation. It's not going to help our reputation if we're taking money for doing something that afterwards you're left with a bit of a sour taste because you thought, I could have done that myself. That was pretty obvious. So we want to leave all of our clients with a good taste in their mouth about how the whole experience was. And I think all of your listeners will relate to this. Everything is about reputation and building that sustainable reputation.
That's true. That's true. Angeli, thank you very much for this amazing conversation. I loved every single minute of it, and I could go on for another 2 hours. But I also think that you have other priorities than being on my podcast. Let's catch up in a year or so to see how artificial intelligence and your company evolved.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on.
Angeli, have a great day and have a successful week, and all the best for your new company.
I will. Thank you.